There comes a moment in every toxic dynamic when something shifts, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. It's the moment when control no longer works, reactions no longer come, and silence speaks louder than pain ever did. This is the moment when the narcissist realizes something unsettling. You've already won. And when that realization hits, everything changes. Today, we're breaking down exactly what happens next. At first, it doesn't look dramatic. There is no loud confrontation, no final argument, no clear ending that announces itself. What replaces it is something far more unsettling: silence. The kind of silence that cannot be provoked, cannot be manipulated, and cannot be broken, no matter how hard the buttons are pushed. This is the moment when control begins to slip, and with it comes a deep, unspoken panic. Control was never accidental. It was built over time through reactions, emotional access, predictability, and the ability to pull strings without being seen. Every response reinforced a sense of power. Every explanation, every attempt to be understood, every emotional reaction served as confirmation that influence still existed. When those reactions disappear, the ground shifts. The familiar tools stop working. The emotional levers no longer move anything. And that absence is terrifying. What triggers the panic is not the loss of the relationship, but the loss of dominance. The realization sets in slowly. The same tactics that once guaranteed attention now lead nowhere. Messages go unanswered. Provocations are met with calm or indifference. Silence becomes a wall instead of an invitation. In that moment, control is no longer assumed, it must be chased. And chasing control reveals vulnerability. Internally, the panic grows because control was tied to identity. It wasn't just something that was done, it was something that defined worth. Without it, there is a sense of shrinking, of becoming insignificant. The fear is not being alone, but being irrelevant, being unseen, being powerless. That fear drives restless behavior, emotional agitation, and an urgent need to reassert influence in any form. What makes this phase so destabilizing is that there is no clear enemy to fight. There are no arguments to win, no reactions to correct, no emotions to dominate. The calm on the other side feels unnatural, even threatening. It exposes how fragile control really was, how dependent it was on participation. Without your engagement, the illusion collapses. And here is the quiet truth. The panic has nothing to do with love lost. It has everything to do with power lost. The moment you stop feeding the dynamic, control turns into desperation. And desperation is the clearest sign that you have already stepped into your freedom. After the initial panic settles in, something curious happens. The energy shifts. The sharp edges soften. What once felt distant, cold, or dismissive suddenly transforms into warmth, attentiveness, even concern. This change can feel confusing, especially if it resembles the version you once hoped for. But this shift is not rooted in understanding or accountability. It is a calculated adjustment to a loss of influence. When old behaviors stop producing results, new ones are tested. The tone becomes gentler. Words sound more thoughtful. There may be unexpected apologies, compliments, or expressions of care that never existed before. On the surface, it can look like growth, but beneath it lies urgency. This is not about connection. It is about regaining access. What's important to understand is that behavior changes when control is threatened, not when empathy is discovered. The sudden kindness appears only after boundaries hold firm. The respect shows up only when distance becomes real. This timing reveals the truth. If change were genuine, it wouldn't require loss to activate it. This phase often creates self-doubt. You may question whether you judged too harshly or left too soon. You may wonder if this is the breakthrough you waited for. That confusion is part of the pattern. The shift is designed to pull you back into emotional engagement, to reopen doors that were finally closed. The goal is not reconciliation, but re-entry. There is also a subtle performance at play. The new behavior often mirrors exactly what you once asked for. Listening replaces dismissiveness. Affection replaces indifference. Curiosity replaces control. But the foundation remains the same. There is no accountability for past harm, only a focus on the present moment and how things could be better now. The past is minimized, reframed, or avoided entirely. As long as the new behavior receives a response, it continues. When it doesn't, it fades. This is how you can tell the difference between transformation and strategy. Real change remains consistent even without immediate reward. Strategic change exists only to restore influence. What matters most in this moment is not how convincing the shift appears, but how you feel within it. If peace disappears and anxiety returns, that is your answer. You are not witnessing growth, you are witnessing adaptation. And adaptation without self-awareness is simply another form of control trying to wear a softer face. When influence no longer works the way it once did, maintaining a perfect image becomes exhausting. The effort it takes to appear calm, superior, or unbothered starts to crack under pressure. What was once smooth and controlled begins to feel strained, and small inconsistencies start slipping through. This is where the mask weakens, not because of honesty, but because the performance can no longer be sustained without validation. At first, the changes are subtle. A sharper tone here, a passive-aggressive comment there. Sarcasm replaces charm, and irritation leaks into conversations that once felt calculated and polished. The patience that seemed endless suddenly runs thin. These moments are not accidents. They are signs of emotional fatigue, of someone struggling to hold together an identity that depends entirely on external reactions. Without attention to stabilize the image, frustration has nowhere to go but outward. What used to be hidden behind charisma now surfaces in small bursts. Contempt shows up in facial expressions, word choices, or dismissive gestures. The confidence that once dominated the room begins to feel brittle, easily threatened by indifference. The absence of admiration creates pressure, and pressure reveals what was never meant to be seen. This stage is often confusing because it contradicts the image you were taught to believe. You may catch glimpses of resentment, envy, or insecurity that were carefully concealed before. There may be moments of emotional exposure that feel raw or disproportionate to the situation. These reactions aren't vulnerability in the healing sense, they are fractures in a persona built on control and superiority. As the cracks widen, blame becomes more visible. Responsibility is shifted, narratives are rewritten. Subtle insults and quiet jabs emerge as a way to regain balance. The mask no longer functions as protection. It becomes armor worn too tightly, restricting movement and revealing stress at the seams. What once felt impressive now feels reactive. This unraveling can feel unsettling to witness, especially if you once idealized the image being presented. But it is also clarifying. The slipping mask exposes the truth that control required constant effort and cooperation. Without your emotional participation, the illusion weakens, the performance loses its audience. And in that moment, something important becomes clear. What you are seeing now is not a sudden change. It is the absence of cover. The mask didn't fall because you caused it to. It fell because it could no longer survive without your attention. When the mask no longer holds and influence continues to slip away, the next move is rarely obvious confrontation. Instead, there is a quiet reach back toward what once provided access and stability. This is the phase where attempts to re-enter your life begin, often disguised as coincidence, concern, or nostalgia. Nothing is direct, yet nothing is accidental either. The contact may seem harmless at first, a message that feels casual, a question that appears practical, a reminder of a shared moment framed as kindness. These gestures are not about rebuilding connection, they are tests. Each attempt is a way of checking whether emotional access still exists, whether a door that was closed can be nudged open without resistance. What makes this stage particularly disorienting is its subtlety. There may be no apology, no acknowledgement of past harm, no accountability. Instead, there is an unspoken assumption that time alone should soften boundaries. The reach is designed to bypass reflection and go straight for familiarity. Familiarity, after all, once guaranteed influence. Sometimes the approach is indirect. Information is passed through others. Social spaces are suddenly shared. Your presence is acknowledged just enough to trigger a response. These are not random overlaps. They are carefully positioned moments meant to create emotional friction. to remind you of a bond that once existed and see if it can still be activated. If a response comes, the reach continues. If it doesn't, the approach shifts. Warmth may turn into guilt. Curiosity may turn into subtle pressure. The underlying question remains the same: can access be restored? The focus is never on repair, only on re-entry. This phase can awaken old habits within you, the instinct to explain, the urge to be polite, the hope that clarity might finally be possible. But clarity was never the goal. Access was. Every interaction, no matter how small, provides information. Silence, on the other hand, provides none. What's important to recognize is that genuine reconciliation requires ownership and change, not testing and hovering. When someone truly wants to rebuild, they speak plainly and take responsibility. These attempts lack both. They rely on ambiguity because ambiguity keeps control alive. By holding your boundaries steady, you end the testing. You send a message without words. The version of you that was accessible without safety no longer exists. And that realization closes the door more firmly than any explanation ever could. When every attempt to regain access fails, something turns inward. The energy that once went into control, image, and strategy has nowhere left to go. What follows is not always loud or explosive. More often, it is quiet, simmering, and deeply destabilizing. This is where silent rage takes shape, fueled by humiliation that cannot be expressed in anger that has no outlet. The absence of reaction creates a kind of emotional vacuum. There's no confrontation to win, no argument to dominate, no response to twist. Without external engagement, the sense of superiority begins to erode. What remains is a painful awareness of being ignored, replaced, or simply no longer relevant. That awareness strikes at the core of identity, triggering resentment that has nowhere to land. This rage rarely appears as open fury. Instead, it leaks out through bitterness, coldness, and subtle acts of self-sabotage. Internally, there is a loop of replayed conversations, imagined victories, and rehearsed comebacks that will never be delivered. The mind searches desperately for ways to restore balance, but without access, balance cannot be reclaimed. The internal collapse happens quietly. Confidence becomes brittle. Self-image fractures. The stories once told to maintain a sense of importance start to feel hollow. Without someone to reflect admiration or emotional energy, the inner world grows unstable. What once felt powerful now feels exposed. This stage is especially dangerous for the person experiencing it because there is no release. Rage turned outward risks consequences. Rage turned inward corrodes from the inside. It can manifest as insomnia, irritability, impulsive decisions, or sudden emotional withdrawal from others. The collapse doesn't look dramatic, but it is profound. From the outside, you may notice a sharp emotional distance or an exaggerated display of indifference, but indifference is rarely real. It is a cover for a wounded ego struggling to reconcile loss of control with a fragile self-image. The silence that protects your peace intensifies the turmoil on the other side. What matters here is not what happens internally for them, but what happens externally for you. Your calm becomes a mirror they can no longer control. Your lack of reaction removes the stage entirely. And that is the turning point. When rage can no longer provoke, manipulate, or intimidate, it collapses under its own weight. What remains is the truth that power only existed where permission was given. Once that permission is gone, the storm has nowhere left to go but inward, and you are already beyond its reach. At the end of this cycle, something quietly settles into plaque. There is no announcement, no dramatic victory scene, no moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Instead, there is peace. The kind of peace that feels unfamiliar at first because it doesn't demand vigilance, explanation, or emotional labor. This peace is not accidental. It is earned through boundaries, self-trust, and the decision to stop participating in what once drained you. What makes this the final victory is that it doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition. There is no need for apologies, validation, or closure to move forward. You no longer measure progress by whether someone understands your pain. You measure it by how safe and steady you feel within yourself. That shift alone changes everything. In this stage, the absence of chaos becomes noticeable. Your thoughts feel clearer. Your body relaxes. Emotional reactions that once felt automatic lose their grip. Triggers fade because the environment that created them no longer has access. Peace becomes a baseline instead of a reward. This is also where perspective sharpens. You begin to see the past without emotional fog. Patterns become obvious. Moments that once confused you now make sense, not in a way that reopens wounds, but in a way that closes them. Understanding arrives without reopening the door. The most powerful part of this victory is invisibility. You are no longer performing, proving, or protecting yourself from manipulation. Your energy is no longer available to be drained. That absence is what makes it final. When there is nothing left to take, the dynamic dissolves on its own. This peace often looks unremarkable from the outside. There is no grand transformation, no external applause. But internally, it is profound. You trust your instincts again. You honor your limits. You no longer confuse intensity with connection or control with care. And without realizing it, you've stepped into a life where your emotional world belongs to you. Not because someone allowed it, but because you claimed it. That is the kind of victory that cannot be taken, challenged, or undone. In the end, winning was never about who lost. It was about who stopped playing. And the moment you chose peace over engagement, you didn't just move on, you became untouchable.